All right, folks, ready to dive into some deep waters today. We're going to be talking about emotional manipulation.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And, this is something we all encounter, probably more than we even realize, right?
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things that once you start learning about it, you start seeing it everywhere.
Oh, totally. Like, I was just thinking about, even like the commercials we watch are trying to manipulate us.
Right. It's not always a bad thing, though.
True, true.
I mean, influence is a part of life, but manipulation,
That's where it crosses the line.
that's where it crosses the line.
So we're going to unpack some of that today. We've got a super interesting YouTube video from Psych2Go, which, by the way, if you haven't checked out their channel, it's fantastic.
Yeah, they make psychology really accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this video breaks down some of the most common tactics that manipulators use. And I think just having that awareness is so powerful.
Definitely.
So let's jump right in. The first one they talk about is love bombing.
Okay. Love bombing.
Sounds kind of nice, right? Like, who wouldn't want to be love bombed?
Right, I know, but it's actually, it can be really deceptive.
It's not what it seems.
It's not what it seems. So basically, love bombing is when someone, especially early on in a relationship, showers you with excessive attention,
Oh, yeah.
affection, gifts. It's like they're trying to sweep you off your feet.
Okay. So imagine you've just started dating someone.
Yeah.
And they are like planning these elaborate dates and they're buying you expensive presents.
Yeah, introducing you to their whole family.
Yeah. Moving way too fast.
Way too fast. And it feels amazing, right?
In the beginning.
It's intoxicating. But there's a catch.
Of course.
Because the manipulator's goal is to make you dependent on them.
So it's not about genuine love.
Not really. It's more about control.
See, that's what's so sneaky about this. Because on the surface, it looks like, oh, they're just so into me. They're so romantic. But really, it's like...
They're trying to create this, I don't know, like a debt almost.
Yeah, like you owe them something.
Yes.
Because they've given you all this...
Attention and affection.
All these gifts. And then what happens?
And then the really dangerous part is when they withdraw that attention.
Ah. So
They've got you hooked.
They've got you hooked, and then suddenly they turn cold.
Exactly. And you're left feeling confused, anxious, desperate to get back that initial high.
Oh. Like an addiction almost.
It is, very much so.
Okay, so have you ever experienced this where someone's affection felt kind of conditional?
Absolutely. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in that, especially if you're, maybe you're a little insecure, you're looking for validation.
You're craving that attention.
Exactly. And that's what makes this tactic so effective.
Wow. Okay, so that's love bombing. One to watch out for, folks.
Definitely. A big red flag.
All right, let's move on to another tactic that the video talks about. Hoovering.
Hoovering. This one's interesting.
It is. And, I have definitely experienced this one. Maybe you have too.
I'm sure I have.
So think about that friend, or maybe it's an ex, who keeps trying to suck you back in after you've tried to distance yourself.
Right.
It's like
a vacuum cleaner.
they just suck you right back in.
And it's usually with apologies, promises to change.
Oh, yeah. I'll be better, I promise.
Right. This time it'll be different.
But is it really?
Usually not.
Because here's the thing. Hoovering is often just another way to maintain control.
Exactly. They're not really interested in changing their behavior.
They just want you back in their orbit.
Back under their thumb.
It's like that on-again, off-again relationship cycle that never seems to end. You break up, they come crawling back.
Laying on the guilt trip.
Yeah. Promising the moon and the stars. You get back together, and then...
Same old patterns.
the same problems resurface.
It's exhausting. And it keeps you in a constant state of uncertainty.
Always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Okay, so how do we deal with hoovering? What's the key here?
Boundaries.
Oh, of course, boundaries. You have to set those boundaries, and more importantly, enforce them.
Which can be so hard when you're dealing with someone who's really good at pushing your buttons.
Yeah, it takes a lot of strength.
But it's crucial,
Yeah.
right? Because otherwise, you just get sucked back into that vortex of dysfunction.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to tactic number 3.
Yeah.
Emotional appeals.
This one's a doozy.
It is. And I think we've all experienced this one to some degree.
Oh, yeah. Who hasn't been guilt-tripped?
Exactly. So emotional appeals, it's when someone uses their emotions as a weapon to try to get what they want.
It's about playing on your empathy.
Your desire to avoid conflict.
Right. They might use guilt trips. They might exaggerate their own suffering. They might even threaten self-harm.
Wow, that's heavy.
It is. And it's incredibly manipulative because it puts you in this impossible position.
Like, you feel responsible for their emotions. And
Exactly.
you don't want to see them hurt, so you end up giving in.
Even if it's against your own best interests.
So how do we recognize and counter emotional appeals? Like, what are some of the signs?
Well, one thing to watch out for is if someone is constantly playing the victim.
Oh, yeah. Well, me.
Exactly. Or if they're always trying to make you feel sorry for them.
And it's always your fault, right? Somehow.
How is your fault? They're never accountable for their own actions.
Ooh, that's a good one to remember.
So if you notice that pattern, that's a red flag.
A big one.
And then how to counter it.
Yeah, because it's hard, right? Because you don't want to be, like, heartless,
Right.
but you also don't want to be manipulated.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance, and it's about remembering that you are not responsible for other people's emotions.
I think that's huge.
You can have empathy for them. You can validate their feelings, but you don't have to fix their problems.
And you don't have to give in to their demands just because they're having a meltdown.
Exactly. You have a right to say no. You have a right to set boundaries.
Okay, this is good stuff.
It is. It's
Yeah.
about empowering yourself.
We're getting there, folks. We're learning how to spot these manipulators.
We're becoming manipulation ninjas.
That's right. All right, let's move on to the next tactic.
Welcome back. So, where were we? Oh, yeah. Learning how to spot those sneaky manipulators.
That's right. But, it's not just about spotting them. It's also about protecting ourselves. Because knowledge without action, it's not that helpful.
Right. Totally. We need to know how to defend ourselves against these tactics.
Exactly. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some strategies for, I don't know, like emotional self-defense.
I like that. Emotional self-defense. So, first and foremost, boundaries.
Boundaries, of course. We talk about boundaries a lot, but they're so important.
They are foundational because boundaries are essentially about, knowing your limits and communicating them clearly.
And enforcing them.
Yes, enforcing them. It's not enough to just say, hey, this is my boundary. You have to actually hold that line.
Which can be really hard, especially when you're dealing with someone who's manipulative.
Right, because they're masters at pushing those buttons. They know exactly what to say to make you feel guilty or make you question yourself.
Oh, yeah. They're experts at playing the victim.
Exactly. So it's about staying strong. It's about remembering your worth. And it's about saying, no, this is not okay, even when it's uncomfortable.
So let's get specific. Let's say you've set a boundary with a friend who's always asking for favors. And they try to guilt trip you into doing something you're not comfortable with.
Classic. Okay, so what you can do is you can acknowledge their feelings, but still hold firm to your boundary.
Like, I understand you're disappointed, but...
Exactly. I understand you're disappointed, but I've already explained my limits, and I'm not going to change my mind.
You might have to repeat yourself, right?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they might try to wear you down.
They'll keep pushing, testing those boundaries.
They're persistent, so you have to be just as persistent.
It's like a game of emotional tug of war.
It is.
Yeah.
And you have to be the one holding the rope tight. Okay, so that's boundaries. What else? What other weapons do we have in our arsenal?
Well, the video also talked about trusting your intuition, that gut feeling that tells you something's not right.
Yes. Intuition is so important. It's like our internal guidance system.
But here's the thing, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Sometimes we ignore our intuition.
We second guess ourselves.
Especially if the other person is really good at making us doubt ourselves.
Right. That's part of their manipulation tactic. They want you to question your own perceptions. They want you to rely on them for validation.
So how do we get better at trusting our gut?
It takes practice. Start by paying attention to those subtle cues, those little red flags that pop up.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, it could be anything. It could be a physical sensation, like you feel a knot in your stomach when you're around this person.
Or you get a headache.
Yeah, or you just feel uneasy.
Right.
Or it could be something they say or do, like their words don't match their actions.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
It's about noticing those inconsistencies and then honoring those feelings.
Not dismissing them.
Right, because your intuition is trying to tell you something. It's trying to protect you.
Okay, so we've got boundaries, we've got intuition. What about when we're already in a situation where we feel manipulated? Like we're in the middle of an argument and we can feel ourselves getting sucked in.
Oh, yeah. Those can be tough. Well, one strategy that can be really effective is disengagement.
Disengagement, what does that mean?
It basically means stepping back from the situation.
Like physically walking away.
Sometimes, yeah, if that's possible. But it can also be more emotional disengagement.
Like detaching yourself from the drama.
Exactly, not taking the bait. Because often the manipulator is trying to get a reaction out of you.
They want to see you get upset.
Right, they want you to engage in that emotional back and forth. So by disengaging, you're essentially taking away their power.
You're not giving them what they want.
Exactly. It's like saying, look, I'm not going to play this game.
Ooh, I like that.
And it's not about being passive-aggressive. It's about protecting yourself.
It's about choosing your battles.
Exactly. Sometimes the best way to win is to not play at all.
Okay, so we've got boundaries, we've got intuition, we've got disengagement. Anything else we should add to our emotional toolbox?
Well, there's one more thing that's really important, and it might sound kind of basic, but it's self-care.
Self-care. Okay, so we're talking bubble baths, face masks, Netflix binges.
Those things can be helpful, but self-care is really about nurturing your physical, emotional, and mental well-being.
So it's about prioritizing your needs.
Exactly. It's about making sure you're eating well, getting enough sleep, exercising, but it's also about taking care of your emotional needs.
Like spending time with people who make you feel good, doing things that bring you joy.
Yes, it's about filling your cup, because when you're feeling depleted, when you're running on empty, you're more susceptible to manipulation.
That makes sense. You're more likely to give in when you're not feeling your best.
Right. So self-care is not selfish. It's essential. It's about strengthening your foundation so that you can stand up to those manipulators.
Okay, so we've got boundaries, intuition, disengagement, self-care. We're building quite the emotional fortress.
We are. And you know, the more you practice these strategies, the stronger you'll become.
But what about when it's not enough? What about when you're dealing with someone who's really, truly manipulative?
Yeah.
And you've tried all these things and it's not working.
That's a great question. And I think in those situations, it's important to remember that you don't have to go through this alone. There's no shame in seeking professional help.
Like therapy.
Exactly. A therapist can provide invaluable guidance and support, especially if you're dealing with a really toxic relationship. They can help you understand the dynamics of the manipulation, and they can give you tools to cope with it.
Because sometimes it's hard to see the manipulation for what it is when you're in the thick of it.
It can be so confusing, especially if the manipulator is someone you care about.
Right. So a therapist can offer that objective perspective.
Exactly. And they can help you create a plan to either address the manipulation or to safely extract yourself from the situation.
Okay, so we got a whole toolkit of strategies now. We're feeling empowered, right?
I hope so. Knowledge is power, and we're armed and dangerous.
That's right. But before we wrap up this part, I'm curious to see how some of these tactics play out in real-life situations and how we can effectively counter them.
Oh, yeah. Let's get down to brass tacks.
Let's do it. We'll dive into those examples in part 3.
Ugh.
Okay, so we've talked the talk, now let's walk the walk, right?
Let's get practical.
Exactly. Because it's one thing to understand these manipulation tactics in theory, but it's another thing to actually know how to deal with them when they're happening to you.
Absolutely. Real-life scenarios can get messy.
They do. So let's play out some of these scenarios and, maybe brainstorm some effective responses.
I'm game.
Okay, so let's start with love bombing. Imagine you're dating someone new, and they're like showering you with gifts, taking you on extravagant trips, introducing you to everyone they know way too soon.
Okay, I'm seeing the red flags already.
Right. But it's hard because in the beginning, it can feel really flattering.
Of course. Who doesn't love attention and affection?
Exactly. But how do we navigate that without getting swept up in the manipulation?
Well, I think the key here is to slow things down.
Okay, so pump the brakes a little bit.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to communicate your needs. You can say something like, hey, I really appreciate all this, but I'd like to take things slow.
Yeah, like, let's just enjoy getting to know each other without all the bells and whistles.
Exactly. And if they're genuinely interested in you, they'll respect that.
But if they get pushy or try to make you feel bad for wanting to take it slow,
That's a huge red flag,
run for the hills.
basically. Okay, what's next?
Let's talk about hoovering. So you finally ended a toxic friendship, but this person just won't let go.
I know the feeling.
Right. They keep texting, calling, showing up at your work, whatever it takes to try to suck you back in.
They're like a stage 5 clinger.
They are. And they usually come armed with apologies and promises to change. But how do we stay strong and resist that pull?
Well, first of all, remind yourself why you ended the friendship in the first place.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to forget when they're laying on the charm.
Exactly. So write it down, make a list, whatever you need to do to remember all the reasons why this person is not good for you. And then when they come knocking, you can say something like, "Look, I appreciate the apology, but I need some space."
And then what? Like, what if they keep pushing?
Then you have to be firm. You can say, "I'm not changing my mind. Please respect my decision." And if they still don't get it, you might need to block their number, unfriend them on social media, whatever it takes to create that distance.
Ooh, that's tough, but sometimes necessary, right?
It is. Your mental health is more important than trying to maintain a relationship with someone who's toxic.
Okay, let's move on to emotional appeals. Let's say you have a coworker who's constantly trying to guilt you into covering their shifts.
Ooh, I've been there.
Right. And it's hard because you want to be helpful, but you also don't want to be taken advantage of.
Exactly. So how do you handle that? Well, I think it's important to be assertive, but also compassionate.
Okay, so find that balance.
Right. You can say something like, "I understand that you're in a bind, but I'm not able to cover your shift this time."
And if they try to guilt trip you,
You can say, "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I have my own responsibilities to take care of."
and you don't have to explain yourself, right?
Exactly. No is a complete sentence.
I love that. Okay, what about hot and cold games? This one is so confusing. Like, one minute they're all over you, and the next minute they're acting like you don't exist.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic manipulation tactic. It's designed to keep you off balance, constantly seeking their approval.
So how do we break free from that cycle?
Well, the first step is recognizing that their behavior is not about you. It's about them.
Easier said than done.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's so important to remember that you are not responsible for their emotional roller coaster.
Okay, so how do we respond when they're giving us the cold shoulder? Do we just ignore it?
You can try, but sometimes it's better to address it directly. You can say something like, "Hey, I've noticed that you've been distant lately. Is everything okay?"
Ooh, I like that. It opens up the communication.
Exactly. And then you can set a boundary. You can say, "If you need some space, I understand, but please just let me know instead of leaving me hanging."
Because that's the worst, right? That feeling of uncertainty.
It is, and it's often intentional. They want you to feel anxious and insecure so that you'll work harder to please them.
Ugh, so manipulative. Okay, and finally, let's talk about gaslighting. This one is so insidious because it makes you question your own sanity.
It's one of the most damaging forms of manipulation for sure.
So let's say your partner is constantly denying things that you know to be true. They're twisting your words, making you feel like you're imagining things. What do we do?
Well, one thing that can be helpful is to start documenting things.
Like, keep a journal.
Exactly. Or even just notes on your phone. If they deny saying something, you can refer back to your notes. It can help you stay grounded in reality.
Oh, that's smart. Because gaslighting can really make you feel like you're going crazy.
It can. And it's also important to talk to people you trust. Friends, family members, a therapist. They can offer an outside perspective and validate your experiences.
Because when you're being gaslighted, it's easy to start isolating yourself.
Right. The manipulator wants you to feel like you can't trust anyone but them.
So having that support system is crucial. And if the gaslighting continues, despite your efforts to address it,
And it might be time to seriously consider whether this relationship is healthy for you. You deserve to be with someone who respects you and doesn't make you question your own reality.
wow, this has been such an insightful conversation. We've covered so much ground today.
We have, from identifying those sneaky manipulation tactics to practical strategies for protecting ourselves.
I feel like we've given our listeners a whole toolkit for navigating those tricky relationship waters.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about these tactics, the less likely you are to fall victim to them.
And if you do find yourself in a situation where you're being manipulated, don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Absolutely. There are resources available, whether it's a trusted friend, a family member, a therapist, or even a hotline. You don't have to go through this alone.
Well said. All right, folks, that's a wrap on this deep dive into emotional manipulation. We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay empowered.